we go now. Hour 3 radio program. Good to have you with us on this Friday afternoon here on a great SiriusXM 82. Welcome, folks. Yours truly. 9 lines. We'll get to you here in a moment. Let's give you a little potpourri and get you set up for what you think might occur as far as the weekend is concerned. NBA first. Well, the Cavs are on the way to the gym in Indiana against the Pacers in Indianapolis, with the Pacers and Cavs deadlocked at a game apiece. Obviously, Indiana has shown you what they can do in this series. They played very well in a 4-point loss after they were down by a whole bunch, or 3-point loss after they were down by a whole bunch in Game 2. They recovered and were very competitive in the game. The Cavs know they're in a series. We'll see how this moves it along here in these next few games. These odd games are huge. You never want to lose 2 in a row in this series, so I think there'll be a little bit more impetus for Indiana. Having lost that second game, they don't want to relinquish that home court advantage so quickly after they had won the first game. That's a 7 o'clock game tonight. I think this has got a lot of wind in its sails, this series. It's funny, the NBA postseason in the first round, which usually is a complete bore, has a much better chance of having lots of teams be involved in 7-game series than the NHL. We'll get to that in a minute, and this is one of them. I think the Cavs and the Pacers here have a lot of wins still in them. I would not be shocked if we're sitting there next weekend for a 7th game in round 1. I really wouldn't be. You got to love the way Indiana has competed. You know, LeBron would not allow that team to lose, the Cleveland team, on Wednesday night. And I think tonight will be a similar game. Remember last year in a Game 3 in Indiana, the Cavaliers were down by about 100 points at the half, came back and won in the second half, and really never looked back until they got to the NBA final. We'll see if that translates again here in 2018. So that's game number 1 tonight. We keep an eye on that. The other 2 games tonight I'm not as wrapped up in. Milwaukee and Golden State will play at 9:30. Milwaukee and Boston will play at 9:30. Obviously, the Bucks trail 2-0 in that series. They should have won game 1. They easily could have won game 1. Celtics kind of cruised in game 2. Tonight at 9:30 in Milwaukee. You got to figure the Bucks will win a game in this series, and this is the game, if they do win, you would feel they would win. You know, at home, the Freak is great, best player on the court. They have been pretty competitive so far. Boston is a little wounded. You figure Milwaukee can win tonight. I wouldn't rule them. I wouldn't guarantee it. The Celtics, they're crafty. They got a lot of good players. They got a great coach. Horford's very underrated. Not a great player, Horford, but he's good. Jaylen Brown there. Rozier has his big performances. But I guess I'll lean to Milwaukee tonight in this game, and I'll probably lean to the Wizards tonight in the game at home at 8 o'clock against Toronto. They trailed 2-0 in that series as well. They were pretty good in game 1. They were blown out in game 2. Toronto showed you something early on in this series. A, they never won a first game. They did. And number 2, they didn't fool around in game 2. They jumped out big time, first quarter, 46 points, and won the game. Toronto has played so far like a 1 seed, a team that won almost 60 games. They've played like that in the first couple. Let's see what they do tonight in a game 3 with the 3 games here this evening as far as the NBA is concerned. Last night, listen, the sports last night was really not that good. The hockey games were not great. The 2 of them early with the Bruins and the Capitals, and the NBA games are not very competitive either. First 3 quarters of Miami was excellent, and then the game got away from the Heat. Embiid played wonderfully. He's the second scorer that team needs in the worst way. Embiid last night had 23 points. He had 7 rebounds. He made a couple of threes. I mean, he gives them so much more life, and he can put the ball in the basket, which takes some pressure off the other role players on that team. Very important. Sixers had a big fourth quarter. They will probably be able to survive this series against Miami. Game 4 is tomorrow afternoon. So that was a good win for Philadelphia. The first 3 quarters were great. Lots of shot making, and then Miami just got overrun in the fourth quarter. The Portland team has been overrun throughout this series. They were really overrun last night. Never really competitive. Down by a whole bunch at the half. Never really got back in the game in the second half. Their guards are taking bad shots, too far out, long jumpers. And I'll tell you that Mercic is playing tremendously. He's the guy that the Pelicans picked up from Chicago. They gave up a first-round pick. He is big. He can shoot. what a factor he has been. They got two good guards in that in the backcourt with Rondo. We all know he knows his way around an NBA playoff series, and Holiday, and then you throw in Davis. That's a pretty good team. I mean, New Orleans is good and dangerous, and they will win Game 4. That game is tomorrow afternoon. A good performance last night, and of course, Golden State. Very strange. No moment of silence. That was what Popovich wanted. Really no notice at all of Aaron Popovich. Nothing on the court before the game. It was really that's the way Popovich wanted it. But you wouldn't have known anything occurred at the organization with San Antonio before the game last night. And then, of course, the Spurs were competitive against Golden State, but the Warriors played pretty well. I only saw the first half of this game. They were up 6 at the half at 53-47, and they won by 13. So Golden State's going to win that series probably in 4 games. The Pelicans are going to win in 4 games. That will set up a very good second-round series between those two teams. I mean, Golden State will win, but it's a good series. And, of course, we have Utah, Oklahoma City, which resumes after another couple days off, which I don't understand. They spread this out. They should be playing tonight. They play tomorrow night. But that guy's chance to be a Game 7. I wouldn't rule Miami out necessarily just quite yet. Indiana, Cleveland could be a Game 7. You still got some drama maybe in his first round in the NBA. The drama in the NHL is really going to be between the Blue Jackets and the Capitals. I don't think there's any other drama. I think Nashville wins tonight. I think the Jets win tonight, which would eliminate those two teams in 5. The Predators are playing Colorado. They'd be out in 5, and so would Minnesota. And I think then that would set up the Western Conference with Vegas and San Jose in the second round with Winnipeg and Nashville, which I think will be a great series. Winnipeg's good. And then, of course, in the East, with the Bruins winning last night against the Leafs comfortably, they have played well. And then the Capitals really showing you a lot of guts in the last 2 games. Guts is not a word you usually refer to when you talk about Washington in the postseason, but they've done a nice job. They were really in huge trouble. They lost the first 2 games. They played in overtime and then a double overtime in Game 3 down 2-0. They figured out a way to win. They got a sort of a freaky goal, which is the way these overtimes lots of times end, and you figure that maybe they got enough momentum now to get through this series. I think the Caps, though, and Washington could play a 7th game, but I think that's the only 7th game you're going to see. I think the other series will all end in 5. I think Tampa will beat the Devils in 5. I think the Bruins will win tomorrow night against the Leafs, and I certainly think the West will end tonight. Nashville, Colorado, and the Wild losing to Winnipeg. That's the NHL story from that standpoint. The baseball, there's not really a lot to discuss from last night. Red Sox are on fire, 16-2. We discussed with Steve a short time ago. Boston just absolutely dominated the Angels in 3 games. And they really were phenomenal. They scored 1 million runs. They've gotten tremendous starting pitching. They lost their first game this year, and they've won 16 and since then they have won 16 of 17. I mean, what are you going to say? They go to Oakland now, figure they're going to have a good series against the A's. You wouldn't think they'd lose it. So 2 out of 3, that could be 18-3 after 21 games. I mean, that's as good as you're going to get. And they might run away and disappear now as far as the American League East is concerned. I mean, they have a lot of pitching. They can score runs. They got a little belief. They got a little chip on their shoulder. Great job by Boston. They buried the Angels. And that tells you about schedules. The Angels, early in the season, played the Royals, who stink, who got about 3 wins. They played Texas, and Texas is in the American League West has won 7 games. The Royals have won 3 games, and the Orioles also played Oakland, who is not very good, and they played Oakland 7 times. So they have played 10. They have played 13 games, the Angels, against the Rangers, the Royals, and the A's. No wonder they were 13-2 coming into this Red Sox series, or 13-3, and then Boston went in there and blew them out. It tells your schedule how significant it is if you get the right team at the right time. I think that's a little product of the Angels. The Mets yesterday lost. The story there with the Braves, of course, was not the Mets losing a game. They're 13-5. The story was Matt Harvey, who had a lot of trouble, 6 runs in 3 innings early. He did pitch a little better later on, but who cares? Harvey has not pitched well. He's got a 6 ERA. Harvey's career has fallen off. 2 surgeries, something to do with it. Tommy John, obviously the thoracic syndrome surgery. He's not the same. A lot of people think he's too wrapped up on velocity. Whatever the case, the Mets are in a tricky spot. They have two other pitchers now that they have to consider for that rotation. Matz, I think he's okay with DeGrom and Syndergaard, so you put those three aside. And then you have Vargas, who they signed in the offseason, hasn't pitched yet because he broke a bone in his hand. He comes back on April 27th in San Diego. You have Vargas, you have Wheeler, who's had two decent starts, and Harvey. One of those guys is not going to be in that rotation. And, right now, you'd have to say it's Harvey. Now, they won't send Harvey to the minor leagues. I won't embarrass him that way. And they have options on all three. They could do that. Harvey has service time. He could decline it because service time is accrued, and he can, if you have enough service time, you can say no to the minor leagues. Wheeler and Vargas can't. He can. But I don't think the Mets would do that to Harvey anyway. But Harvey is a shell of what he used to be, and he's a guy who's going to be a free agent. That's quite a story, the falling off of Matt Harvey, who in 2013 was pitching in the All-Star game for the Mets, and a year or two later was dominant in the postseason against the Cubs and against the Dodgers, Cubs, and of course the series against Kansas City in Game 5 after a bad Game 2. So we'll see with what happens to Harvey, but he's not been so good so far. Good performance by Arrieta last night. 10 strikeouts, 7 innings, only allowed 1 hit. Arrieta wins his second game for the Phillies. Phillies and Atlanta are both 11-7 in the NL East. More impressed by Atlanta there because Atlanta, had a road trip that took them to Colorado, Chicago, and Washington. They have played the Nationals 6 times. So they've had a little better test of schedule. The Phillies have 11 or 12 wins right now, partly because of who they played. They had 3 against the Reds, who fired their manager already. They played 3 against Tampa, who's awful. That's 6. And they played 3 against the Marlins. So they're 8-1. 9-1 the Phillies are against those teams. They were awful against they're 2-4 against the Braves and 0-2 against the Mets. 9-1 against the rest of them. Keep that in mind. Schedule plays a factor here of who gets hot and who doesn't. Quarter after the hour, your calls when we continue. Mad Dog on